The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it another minute or so to allow some additional people to come on. Thanks for joining. Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar session today. My name is Shelley James. I am the new Vice President of Sales Marketing with Exciting here in the US. Today, we're going to talk about SAP Access Control, GRC, integrating with SAP SuccessFactors. And our presenter today is Alessandro Banzer, our SAP Security and GRC expert here at Exciting. A couple of things to mention before we get started. This is one of several new webinars that we are scheduling for this year. We have a couple more on the schedule, another one in April and one for May. There is a slide at the end of this presentation where you can see upcoming sessions with a link to our webpage where you can see updates as they occur. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, you can use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. Just type in your questions. We'll keep an eye on them. And then at the end of Alessandro's presentation, we'll try to answer as many of those questions as we can. This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording from GoToWebinar. Later, you will receive an email from our marketing team to follow up and make sure you all got your questions answered. If you have any additional ones, please send them back to the marketing email or to me at sjames@exciting.com, and we can help answer them offline. Now that we have those items covered, I'm going to hand things over to Alessandro, and he's going to walk you through today's session. Alessandro.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelley. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I just accidentally muted myself. Today, we're going to talk about SAP Access Control, GRC, and particularly with integration to SAP SuccessFactors. We had a webinar a few weeks ago where we talked about SAP IAG, the Identity Access Governance, the cloud solution for to manage access governance from SAP, and we talked about HR-driven life cycles, like kind of like the HR trigger, but in the cloud. And after that meeting, we received a lot of interest from, because I mentioned a few things about SuccessFactors. A lot of you guys were asking questions in regards to, access control and how we can connect and leverage our existing implementation to also provide, the known features to manage SuccessFactors. So today I want to talk about what is available within SAP Access Control for SuccessFactors, what can be done, what cannot be done, where are the limitations, what is possible, what not. We'll briefly talk about the HR integration. We're not going to do into all the detail when it comes to the HR trigger. We're not going to cover how it's being installed and how it's being configured. We talk more about the high-level approach, how it works, what can be done, and how you can use SAP Access Control in combination with SuccessFactors. I then have a few screenshots. I decided to not go into the system and do a live demo because I always get a little bit sidetracked when I do live demos. I just know a thing too much usually, and I get sidetracked and lose time. So I just focus on a couple of screenshots, but everything I'm showing you will fully work in your system. It's screenshots from my installation, and all that will work. I then also have I think 3 slides or so where I will just point out a few things that you have to remember when you implement SuccessFactors with access control, because there are a few things that can go wrong or are very difficult to understand if you haven't experienced it just yet. As Shelley said, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just use the questions box. I'll try to answer them either throughout the webinar if I see them. I have them on my other screen, so if you see my eyes glance to my other screen, that's just if I see a question coming in, or then we'll take it up at the end. Perfect. Just before we get started, a few things about Exciting. Who are we? What do we do? Exciting has been around since 2008. We're focusing on SAP security. We have different tools that we provide to our customers. We also do a lot of consulting work in the area of GRC, in the area of IDM, in the area of authorizations management, everything around SAP security. That's what we do. That's what we do best. That's what we know. That's why we're here. All our solutions, they're fully SAP certified. So if you ever see us talk about our solutions, we're fully certified. We have different recognized expertise statuses, for example, in the area of governance, risk, compliance for GRC. We're also an SAP Gold partner. And then in addition, we're also doing a lot of SAP trainings for SAP. So we kind of act as a trainer for SAP. And if you book an SAP training class, it's very likely you're going to talk to one of us that will be delivering that training class for SAP. So all in all, everything covered around SAP security. I don't want to get too much into us. We'll talk about the topic today. That's why we're here. As I mentioned initially, a couple of weeks ago, we had the webinar about the HR-driven identity lifecycle in SAP IHE. I just put for reference for those of you that haven't attended that webinar but are interested, just the recording that can be found on YouTube. Just follow the link. You'll get all the information later. So if you don't have to type it, you'll get it later. Remember from the IHE webinar, especially for the ones that participated there, and there were a lot of questions. We know that, from a marketing perspective, when SAP talks about bringing the access governance features into the cloud, SAP talks about SAP IHE, the Cloud Identity Access Governance solution, which is a software as a service solution from SAP to manage the cloud solutions like, for example, SuccessFactors, Ariba, and so on. What I mentioned in the last webinar is that when it comes to SAP SuccessFactors, then we don't necessarily need IHE. And that kind of raised a lot of questions, and that's why we're having the session today. So in this picture, and this is the architecture slide from IHE, we can see that basically SuccessFactors goes through IHE and then comes to our SAP Access Control. But as I mentioned, for just the integration with SuccessFactors, we can have a direct connection from Access Control directly up to the cloud where SuccessFactors runs. Now, obviously, when we don't have IHE, the only cloud application that we can connect is SAP SuccessFactors. So we can connect directly, but that's it. We cannot connect Ariba or anything else from Access Control. If we want to do that, then we require IHE. But for those of you that have maybe HR in the cloud with SuccessFactors, and you had the HR trigger, for example, previously, and you want to reuse that capability or enable it for SuccessFactors, then that is natively possible also with Access Control without having the need for IHE. That's why we have the session today, and that's what I want to focus on in today's webinar. For those of you that wonder, what is SuccessFactors, and I'm not an expert by no means. But what's important is in SuccessFactors has different modules. The one that is supported is Employee Central. SAP SuccessFactors Employee Central is a cloud-based HCM solution. It's a SaaS solution, software as a service, that allows HR to run different processes. The one thing that's interesting for us is kind of like that, the processes around recruiting and onboarding, where if an employee starts, we have to make sure they get a user ID, or if an employee leaves the organization, we have to make sure the SAP user accounts are terminated. We can also handle job changes. So if in SAP SuccessFactors, we're doing a mover type of activity, where an employee might move from one organization to the other, or does just a job change that has to trigger certain events in access control to review, for example, the access, or to reprovision different access, to take off access, and so on. And all that we kind of want to have very similarly to what we had before with the on-premise HCM, with SAP HR. So what is available from access control, or what access governance features does access control cover for SAP SuccessFactors? First and foremost, as I said, it's for SAP SuccessFactors Employee Central, and what it basically provides is the features as shown here. We can do access risk analysis. So if you want to define your SOD conflicts, critical action, critical permissions, or even critical roles, that's all possible to define in access control, and then run a risk analysis against a user or even against roles in SuccessFactors. You can also enable cross-system SODs, where you have one portion, for example, in SuccessFactors, the other portion on-premise. That's also possible. I have an example later. We'll also talk about the difficulties there in just a little bit. Then obviously you can manage and provision access to SuccessFactors. So it's not just that we can only retrieve the HR events. We can also manage access within SuccessFactors. So if you want to create a user account in SuccessFactors, if you want to assign access to someone in SuccessFactors, all that can be also done from access control. That ultimately means you can also do user access reviews. You can make roles, and we have it all the way at the bottom here, from a role management perspective. Obviously, if we provision access, we can also manage the roles. So you can import the roles from SuccessFactors, whether it's the static roles or permission roles. You can bring them into access control. You maintain the attributes as you always do for all the other type of roles, like your role owners, business processes, the functional area, and so on. And then you can use those roles in the access request management to provision, whether it's assign roles, remove roles, all that is possible. And as I said, also user access review, all that can be done. As part of the access request processes, you can obviously also integrate risk mitigation. So you can mitigate risks, whether it's part of the access request process or whether it's as part of the risk analysis. All that functionality is also available for SuccessFactors. And then last but not least, and I think that's very interesting, is that HR trigger functionality that's now also enabled for SuccessFactors. That basically allows you to cover the entire hire to retire process, the job changes. All that is supported natively with SuccessFactors as well. For HR trigger, at the end of the day, it works very similarly as it used to work with SAP HR on-premise, where basically we get the event into access control. We then define different rules, what's supposed to happen. And then, for example, in a simple scenario, we can create an access request to create a user or to delete the user, and whatever we define as part of that process. And we're still talking the MSMP workflows, we're still talking BRF Plus rules. We can route them wherever we want to route them to. So we still have all that flexibility that access control offers with those frameworks to manage those type of requests, whether they come from an HR trigger or whether they come, whether they are started manually. It's the same way as it always has been. That's the nice thing about integrating SuccessFactors with access controls. There are, however, a few things that are not available simply because there's no functionality. The one thing is the firefighter capabilities. So if you're using the emergency access management, with the firefighting, whether it's the ID-based or the role-based firefighting, it doesn't matter. It's not available for SuccessFactors. There's no functionality whatsoever. That's also not available in IHE. So if you're looking into IHE, that's also not available. For SuccessFactors at the moment, as it stands, there's no firefighting capabilities available. Then also, there is no SAP pre-delivered rule set. So if you're talking about the BC sets, the business configuration sets, there's no pre-delivered rule set for SuccessFactors. So you basically have to build your own rule sets. That you can do. I have a couple of screenshots as well. can be done the same way it has always been done. The type of authorization is a little bit different, but at the end of the day, if you know access control, you have no problem also creating a rule set for SuccessFactors. The rule set, however, when you go to IHE has a standard rule set for SuccessFactors, but it's not available for access control. If you need any type of rule sets, you can always contact, for example, us, as part of a consulting package where we can define rule sets together, or deliver rule sets. That's always possible. When it comes to the HR integration, this is a similar slide I used in the last webinar. So as I mentioned already, with SuccessFactors, we can natively talk to SAP Access Control. So we can go into SAP Access Control, go into transaction SM59 where we maintain our RFC destinations, and we can set up a direct destination to SuccessFactors. It's obviously not an ABAP connection, it's a HTTP connection to an external system, or we can do a direct connection to SuccessFactors. All that we need is a user, a technical user that has enough authorizations to establish that connection and have enough authorizations within SuccessFactors to retrieve the data that it needs to be able to receive. We're talking about API authorizations on SuccessFactors side. And once that's established, then we can treat it pretty much the same way as we treat any other system that we connect to access control. So we still have to do the integration scenarios. We have to add the connector to a connector group. We have to maintain all the integration scenarios for provisioning, for authorizations management, and so on. All that is very similar as to any other system, like any other ABAP system we would connect. It's just really the connection itself that's a different type, but then behind that, it's the same steps as we've always done. And once that's then ready, then we can also enable those HR trigger capabilities. So we use it the same way. It's the same approach as it was with SAP HR. There's BRF plus rules that we have to establish, to get the incoming triggers and build rules that basically define where the workflow is supposed to go, and then we can do the rule to role mappings to provision certain access in certain scenarios. And that's basically what that HR trigger allows us to do. As I said, from an events perspective, and I have one more slide here. From an events perspective, we can cover the new hire. So the regular hire, it covers the job change and also the termination. The new hire and the termination, I would say the termination is the easiest one because very often we're just deleting the users. New hire obviously is creating users and assigning maybe initial roles. Job change is always a little bit more tricky because with a job change is always the question, what do we take away? What do we add? That's always a little bit the tricky one, but also here a lot of things can be achieved simply because access control offers us that great flexibility with BRF Plus, with MSMP to build all kind of crazy workflows, if you will, to handle various scenarios. Obviously, from an approach perspective, the event comes from SuccessFactors into access control. So that's just what needs to be set up. And then once it comes into access control, then we use BRF Plus, we use MSMP to define what we want to do with it. Those workflow processes, they can be built however we want to build it, whether it's no approval required, whether it's approval required, whether we include risk analysis, whether we include mitigation, all that can be, has to be configured within access control. Again, very similar to what we have done with HR before. And then obviously, if we create users or if we update users, we can then provision any type of backend systems, and SuccessFactors at the end of the day is also considered a backend system. So I can have a new hire event where I create a user in the simplest form, and in access control we say, okay, we're creating a user in my S/4HANA, which is on premise, but I'm also creating a user with maybe base authorizations in SuccessFactors. So that's also where SuccessFactors is not only the sending system that sends us the event, it can also then be provisioned further down the line. That's very important to remember. So I just, like I said, I took a couple of screenshots because I didn't want to spend too much time in the system. Also, my system is not the fastest. So what's obviously important is when we configure SuccessFactors, we have to run synchronization jobs. So for example, the repository object sync job needs to be run. That synchronizes the users, synchronizes the roles. It populates the very same tables as it would populate for an ABAP-based system. So we get all those GRC tables that you might know or might not know. All those are also populated the same way as for any other system. And you can see here, I just went in and did a role search against all the roles that I have imported from SuccessFactors. And at the end of the day, these are roles the same way they are for for any other system. Obviously, when we go in, we cannot go down all the way down to the actions and permissions as we can, for example, for access for an ABAP-based system. But we get the role. We can maintain the attributes as you can see here. So we can maintain the landscape. We have the descriptions that's imported from SuccessFactors. We can do the business process and sub process. Here I didn't do anything. I just kept them with our default values. Some are even in German. And then, like I said, the functional area and so on, all that, the role owners, all that can be maintained like we always do. We can use role import, we can do role must change, all that is possible. When it comes to risk analysis, as I mentioned, we can do single system SODs, we can do single system just the critical authorizations or critical permissions, critical actions. We can also run critical roles. We can define roles as critical within SuccessFactors and then run the same type of analysis as we do for any other system. As you can see here, I'm running a risk analysis for my user against my rule set SuccessFactors test. In this example here, I have a cross-system SOD. That's why the system here is a logical group, which in my scenario is just called cross. And in that cross system, I have basically two systems. One is SuccessFactors, as we can see here in my results, where we have the DSF direct is my direct connection to SuccessFactors. And then I have another system, which is my X53, which is an ABAP-based system. And here I'm basically running a cross-system SOD. So it's an SOD where one function, one part of the SOD is within SuccessFactors and the other one is on the ABAP side. And we can see that here. So basically for my user, for a risk here, I have one portion of the risk in SuccessFactors where I have an action called user admin, for example, to reset passwords or to create users within SuccessFactors. And then the other portion is on my ABAP side, which in this example is SU01, user maintenance. Obviously, that SOD does not make a lot of sense. It was more just for demo purposes to show that if I define an SOD, and here both times for user admin, it can also be done. What's very important when we run cross-system SODs, and this really is just true for, not just true, but very true for cross-system SODs, is we have to make sure that the users are properly mapped. So we know from access control there's a user mapping table where we can basically say for every connector, or we don't have to do it for every connector, but for connectors or for systems where the user IDs differ from, like, let's call it the master user ID, we have to do that user mapping. With SuccessFactors, that's important because in SuccessFactors very often users are created with either an ID, maybe the email address, might be the same as my regular user ID I use on ABAP-based systems, but very often it's not the case. And we can see it here. So basically I did a mapping for SuccessFactors where I say the user ID in SuccessFactors is sfadmin, but my user ID on the ABAP side is abancer. So we have I have a different user ID in the two different systems. And obviously when we do cross-system SODs, we have to make sure that those users match because one portion is here, the other portion is over there, and I have to understand, or have to access control has to understand that those two users are the same. Otherwise, it would not show as a cross-system SOD. And for that, we can maintain that user mapping table. You know, in most cases, unfortunately, it has to be maintained manually. For SuccessFactors, there's now an enhancement where we can do that more automated. I'll talk about that here in just a little bit. When you know, I have another slide where we talk about that. But that's one thing to keep in mind. If you do cross-system SODs, make sure that the mappings are correct. Then obviously, again, you know, here another screenshot, just again risk analysis. You know, for example, here I'm analyzing my SF admin user, and I'm checking for critical roles. And basically, what this means is that I have certain roles defined as critical, and we can obviously also analyze that the same way as we would analyze any other critical role that we defined within access control. I don't have any screenshots about access request. Again, it's just treated as a different system. So you know, if you connect and you import the roles and the roles are available for provisioning, then you can select them in the access request and run them through, you know, the same way as you run them through for any other type of access you would be requesting. A few things I still want to point out, because there's a few things that are very important to know, especially when you run risk analysis, especially for risk analysis. SuccessFactors is a case-sensitive system. So what that means is I can have a user ID in SuccessFactors that's Abe Answer in smaller letters. And I can have another user ID in SuccessFactors, Abe Answer in capital. And they're two different user IDs. So SuccessFactors is case sensitive. Okay, that's important to remember. I also have one screenshot, I think, or let me quickly just move this over here. We can see here, for example, I ran a risk analysis, and now I'm doing live. I ran a risk analysis against my SuccessFactors, and we can see I have a user ID, Abe Answer in capital, and Abe Answer in smaller letters. And that's possible. So we can have different, or we can have user ID, one's capital, one's in smaller letter. So it's a case-sensitive system. Now, what this means is that in access control, there's the configuration possible. There's basically two configuration parameters I'm showing here, where we can maintain the system as a case-sensitive system. Once it's the 1022, where we can say connector for which object IDs may be maintained case-sensitive, and then the other one is also where we can do the extended objects enabling for a connector. So those two need to be considered. What's important is here, if you, let's say you're just playing around and you're integrating SuccessFactors, if you have the connection established in SM59 and you run a repository object sync, but you don't have those parameters maintained, which happened to me before because I was just super excited that the connection, you know, got established. So let's run a sync to see if I got the users. If I do that, then my master table for the users will be updated in uppercase. And then I realize, oh, something is not working, and I go back in here and maintain these. What then happens is if I resync, it will, you know, maintain them in lower cases, and then I might have duplicates. So be very careful there when you configure SuccessFactors. Follow the guidelines. There's a lot of blogs online to you know, properly configure that. That's just makes it a little bit easier. Otherwise, I mean, you're not breaking anything. Just certain things will not work you know, properly. You can obviously correct it. You can, you know, use the deletion program to delete the data from the connector, and then you're clean again and you resynchronize. But just keep that in mind. Just saves you some headache. Another thing also that might be a little bit odd to say, but you know, this is one thing that very often gets forgotten, or just, you know, when I talk about that, and people say, oh, the synchronization job for the authorization sync is called PFCG authorization sync. So why should I run it against SuccessFactors? There's no PFCG in SuccessFactors. It doesn't matter. We still want to run this job, especially if you plan on maintaining the rule set, because what this basically does, similar to what it does for our ABAP-based system, where it basically synchronizes the SU24 proposals for transaction codes. This does the same thing from SuccessFactors. Obviously, in SuccessFactors, we don't have an SU24 because we don't have PFCG. It's not an ABAP-based system, but we can still synchronize back the authorizations information into access control. That ultimately means if we go into access control, let's say we define a function, to build a rule, build the rule set, we can then go into the function, we pick our system, like here, for example, the connection to SuccessFactors. I can use the action and I can just use the drop down and see what actions are available. So they will all be proposed. I can select one, like for example, data model. And if I then switch over to permissions, they're already proposed. And this is basically all the available permissions for that action. And then it's very easy for me to say, okay, this one needs to be active, this one needs to be active, and so on. So it basically gives me all those proposals as we know from SU24, the same way also for SuccessFactors. So just keep that in mind. Don't be confused if it says PFCG. The job knows what to do, and the job knows what type of system it is, and it will retrieve the correct information. That just makes your life so much easier if you build a rule set. Another thing then, as I already mentioned, with that user mapping. So user mapping, again, very important for cross-system SODs because user IDs might be different from one system to another. So what we can do is this is a little bit a newer parameter. I'm not sure if you know them. Is 1055, where we can basically maintain connectors that are enabled for an automatic user mapping when you run the repository object sync job. What this means is you have to maintain the parameter. You have to say, in 1055, this is my SuccessFactors system. And then in addition, you have to also make a field mapping for that system. So basically in your access control configuration, you have to go onto into the field mapping as shown here for your connector, which in my example here is my SFEC for SuccessFactors Employee Central. And here I'm saying that in access control for the field sub user ID, it's mapped to the system field, which is the field now that comes from SuccessFactors. And that can be any field from the entity user. So in SuccessFactors, because it's API based, there's an entity, and that entity is called user, and every field from that entity user can be mapped here back to sub user ID. By default, there is the sub user ID field. I'm pretty sure it's always there. It's not guaranteed that it's maintained in SuccessFactors, but it can be. If, let's say, in SuccessFactors, when users are created, it just follows an ID, which it often does, then the sub-user ID can also be maintained manually in SuccessFactors. And that then can be passed over to access control to populate that user mapping table automatically. Because again, if the user IDs are different, then I need that mapping. And that's one thing with that synchronization job, with the repository object sync job, we can automatically create that or update that table with the sync job. That just can be a big time saver. Again, here, very important, it comes down to the quality of the data. If that field's not maintained in SuccessFactors, then you won't be able to do a field mapping. Okay, so it really comes down to a good quality of your data. Right, perfect. So that's kind of like what I want to show you. We won't use the full hour, at least I have no plan. So let me see what questions we got. Maybe Shelly, anything you have seen that I should point out? Let me see. Okay, so there's a few questions, or at least I see two or so in regards to the access risk analysis. And one question is whether it's happening within GRC or within SuccessFactors. I mean, the risk analysis is the same way as it is for any other system. Access control retrieves the information and then, does the calculation. So we build the rules in access control. And if you run a risk analysis, like I was just showing before, let me switch back the screen I was here before. If you run a risk analysis like here, I run it against a user, and then it basically retrieves the information from that user. Let's see if we can. Not sure. Yeah, I was expecting a timeout. Let me quickly see if we can get back here. So it's same way as for any other. So let's say here I do my user. Maybe let's do the admin user as well. No, let's use the cross, which includes it. And then here we're using my test and go. And this might take like a couple of seconds to run, but basically it's now retrieving the information from SuccessFactors, roles and role information, what permissions are within that role, and then it validates against those access rules that we have from the rule set. So same way as for an ABAP-based system, it retrieves information, does the calculation, and shows us the information here. So the risk analysis is running within access control and not within SuccessFactors. Then there was a question regarding, oops, give me a second, my chat box just disappeared. Where did it go? Oh, here, sorry. Then there was and here we now got it back. Let's maybe just 1 second here. If we go to details, we can obviously then see, from like, for example, here with my Abe answer user, I have a risk, one function. This is for like a data model. And then obviously I can also see from, which roles it comes. So here we can see these are the roles from SuccessFactors. They can be part of maybe like a composite type of role, or part of a business role. That's also possible. So we can also assign or make SuccessFactors roles, the technical roles, part of a business role. And then here, we can see what is basically triggering that issue. So the information again comes from SuccessFactors, but it gets always evaluated within access control. Hope that makes sense. Then there was a question in regards to mass user maintenance, mass user changes. Again, when it comes to user access or access requests, same as for anything else. So you can do single user request, we can do multi-user request. All that is also possible. So if you want to assign a role to 10 users in SuccessFactors, that is possible. There was a question in regards to user mapping. The user mapping, so as I said, so at the end of the day, maybe I just jump into the system. Let me quickly, because we still have a little bit of time. So at the end of the day, in SuccessFactors, in access control, let me just go back here. This is the table where we maintain, and I can also show you where it is in the customizing. So you go to GRC, access control, and then there's the maintain user master user ID mapping table. And in here, you basically say for each connector, what is the, let's call it the local user ID in that system, and what's the user ID it should be mapped to in the other systems. So if I do a cross system analysis, and let's say in my X53 system, my user ID is Abe answer, then it's mapped to SF admin in SuccessFactors. So this is kind of how it works. And you can see here, if I have different users, whether it's ABAP-based systems or SuccessFactors, I can map different systems to the same master user ID. And this has to happen on GRC. So this is basically a table that we have to, mass populate, or one by one. There's mass features here to mass upload, from an Excel file or CSV file. But this needs to happen in GRC. So it's on access control side. If you use that repository sync job where we can use that automatic mapping, as I was showing here, then that will happen throughout the repository object sync. It will still happen in GRC, but it will use the information from SuccessFactors to make that mapping. So again, if my user ID in SuccessFactors is 12345, but in SuccessFactors, HR, the HR department maintains a field that's called sub-user ID and provides Abe answer there, then that will automatically be mapped back to the table, and it then knows that Abe answer is Abe answer, but Abe answer in SuccessFactors is 12345. So that's that mapping that we can do here. Hope that makes sense. Let me see. I'm just reading some other questions. There's a few here. Then there was a question that I think more IHE related. You know, what's the difference between the IAS and IHE? So IAS is Identity Authentication Services, which is part of the identity services. IAS, IPS. IAS is still the more common name. IAS is basically the authentication service that allows users to authenticate, whether it's through single sign-on. You know, that's the authentication. IHE is similar to access control. It provides similar functionality and capabilities as access control does, just in the cloud. So IHE is the cloud solution for access governance. Very similar or somewhat similar to access control. It's not a replacement for access control. It's just a cloud-based solution that has similar capabilities as access control. And when you implement IHE, you also require the IAS and the IPS for identity provisioning, as well as for identity authentication. Because, you know, if you log into IHE, you have to be able to log in. Means you have to be able to authenticate. And the IAS is what provides that authentication. All right, what else do we have? And Shelley, feel free to help me here. Otherwise, I'll just try to go by one by one.
Does that go along with the one below that are all these discussed features available even if we use the direct connection between GRC, AC, and SF without the IAG bridge?
Yes, so everything I was showing today is possible without IAG. That's very important. That's why we had the session today, because there's a little bit of misconfusion. Also because you know, depending on marketing slides you look at, it says no cloud solution is able to be connected to access control. I just wanted to go against that myth and prove it's not correct. You can directly connect. So everything I'm showing here means I'm directly connecting. And also let me just quickly show that in the system. You know, if we go to SM59, and here this is my GRC system. So this is my X53, which is my GRC, my access control box. And here we can see I have a HTTP connection to an external system. And I have here, this is my direct connection to SuccessFactors. And we can also see that here. So I'm directly connecting to SuccessFactors. Okay, so this is my SuccessFactors instance. I have a demo instance for this case. You know, you as a true SAP customer, it's not a demo instance. You will have a live instance, but it's the same way. It's just depending on which data center it's hosted, there's a different name, and you won't have the AP sales demo. Will just be, I think, AP. There's a naming convention for it, and it will be SuccessFactors.com. But it's the same way. And here you basically connect. So I have my user ID, for example, password saved, and I'm connecting directly to SuccessFactors. We can also see that here. This is a direct connection, and I can connect. In the other scenario, you know, if I use the IHE, we can see it here. Yeah, this is a bad example because I also changed it already. But with you know, this is really a true direct connection to SuccessFactors. You don't need IHE. If you have IHE, then you can also use it through the IHE bridge. Obviously, that's possible. for what I'm showing or what I showed today, it can be used directly. Then there's a couple of questions in regards to firefighter. Again, firefighter or EAM is not available for SuccessFactors. There's no firefighting capability in SuccessFactors. I'm also not aware of any on the roadmap. The reason, to be very honest, is I think it's just the authentication, because it's a browser-based application. You know, when you're in a browser with SuccessFactors, you're, you know, as a customer, you're very often using a single sign-on. So there's not like a username and password. That could be potentially, but most customers nowadays use single sign-on. So you're not even knowing your username and password. You're just automatically authenticated in SuccessFactors. And so therefore, it's very difficult to provide firefighting capabilities. If you think back in ABAP terms, it just does a log on with an ID and a password. That's not the, it's not as simple in the browser world to do that. That's like the difficulty with that capability. I'm not sure if anything will come out anytime soon. At least it's not on the roadmap. You can always open ideas in the influence portal and see if there's anything. But as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, there's nothing on the roadmap. Okay. Then there's a lot of questions about IHE. We covered IHE in the last webinar. So yeah, then one question in regards to the rule set. So as I said, for SuccessFactors, for Employee Central, there's no standard rule set available. So there's no basic set that we can use. So as a customer, we have to build our own rule set. There's also not really reference documentation, as far as I'm aware of, that you can reference to see what and how it should be mapped, and what function maybe should be mapped back to any functionality in S4 or on ABAP side for a cross system. That really comes down to building it yourself. I mean, if you talk to consulting companies that have done rules and implementations before and built custom rules, we obviously have a certain type of reference, but there's nothing officially available from SAP. Then there's a question in regards, again, rule set, whether from an IHE perspective, if it can be converted back to a GRC. The simple question is yes, you can. The structure of the rule sets in access control and IHE are a little bit different, but it contains the same information. So in access control, we have those 9 or 10 files, 10 if you include the risk owners. Otherwise, it's 9 files that you have to provide, with the functions, with the activities, and so on. In IHE, it's a little bit different. We have less files, they're more consolidated, but at the end of the day, it's the same data. So if you have an IHE rule set or vice versa, you can migrate it very easily, just in Excel, copying a couple of columns from here to there and change the structure a little bit, and you can upload it on either side. Okay, let me see, Shelley.
A couple of people asked about central payroll. Is it not supported in SuccessFactors?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think so, but I'll follow up on that, and we'll include it in the follow-up email. I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either.
Yeah, I don't think so. Let's see. Time-wise, we can still answer a few questions for those that are still here.
There's a couple around. Does the risk analysis support both dynamic and static groups and provisioning?
We can do static groups for sure, as well as the permission roles. The dynamic groups, I don't think so. Again, I would have to look into it. I don't think so. I think it's just the permission roles and the static rules. Okay, now there's so many questions. When I scroll, it's scrolling big times.
Yeah, some of them are duplicated. It's okay.
Yes, that's what I'm gonna go. Yeah, one in regards to like the like role-based permissions. I think goes kind of like whether the critical action, critical permission. So let me just go into the system. I think that's probably the easiest. I probably have to time out here. So if we, let me just create a new function. If we build rules, obviously, we can define it either way, single system or then cross system. And if you select the system, let's say we select my SuccessFactors, and I use an action, you can see, so these are the actions. Now, obviously, from the ABAP world, when we talk about action, very often we mean transaction. There's ability, in actions, you also maintain Fiori applications, for example, any type of actions. Now, the actions in SuccessFactors, they're just a little different. But for example, like the one I was showing earlier, like the user admin, this is an action, is user admin, and we can just maintain the user admin with permissions, and then we can define it as a critical action. So we can also analyze critical actions, which would be the action plus the permissions as we maintain them. We can also maintain critical permissions without the action. So if we just say, the critical permission is user admin with, I don't know, like password reset, for example. There's somewhere we have the password reset. For example, here, user password. I don't necessarily think it makes sense to just maintain the permissions without the action, because as far as I remember in SuccessFactors, that's not, if you have the authorization concept, and I think that's what I want to say, the authorization concept in SuccessFactors is different than it is in ABAP. ABAP, we can have critical authorizations, critical permissions, like debugging authorizations, which just come from the sdevelop authorization objects. There's no transaction code I need to get debugging authorizations. It's just the authorization object with the right field and values that allow me to debug, for example. In SuccessFactors, it's different. I'm by no means an expert when it comes to SuccessFactor authorizations, but it's a different concept, and we don't have PFCG where we can make those fancy authorizations. So that's why it's a little bit simpler. We still have the same approach. We could potentially still do the permissions. I don't think it makes sense. It's more from a critical action perspective, because there will always be the action up front that then ultimately brings in those authorizations. But from that perspective, we can see here, I maintain it the same way as I would maintain it for a transaction code. Just obviously different permissions, different fields in SuccessFactors, different values. That's just the X, whether I can or cannot. But from that perspective, very, very similar. Sounds good. I think, Shelly, that's pretty much it, right? Unless you think I forgot something very important, I think most of the other ones were already covered or were a little bit out of context from today.
No, I think we're good. And I think we can probably put something together and send out with the follow-ups if we missed any.
Perfect.
All right.
Sounds good. And we have here the next 2 webinars that are coming up. The first one is what we just had today. If you're interested in how to harden RFC interfaces, so if you have RFC interfaces that run on SAP all or very extensive authorizations, you want to understand how can you redesign them risk-free in production, get them tested, everything, then that webinar is for you. And then on May 5th, we have a very interesting session with Shelley, who will be talking about SAP audit and how we can automate SAP audits with certain expert tools that are recommended by SAP. Also very, very interesting for sure to join. With that, thank you very much from my side for your attention today. I hope you have all your questions answered. I hope it was interesting. If you have any feedback or any questions that were not answered, here's my email, or as Shelley pointed out, just reply to our marketing email. I will be more than happy to help you out there.
Yep, and just to finish up, we'll have updates on our website as far as new sessions that we're going to be doing throughout the year. There is a YouTube playlist, and you should have all received an email with the link to the playlist. If not, please drop us an email. Let us know, and we'll send it out again. Every new session will be part of this playlist, so if you have the link, bookmark it, and you can use it over and over. We typically upload every session recording within 48 hours after the session occurs, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the next session. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.